45% more. That single figure on the leaked payroll spreadsheet burned into my retina, refusing to change no matter how many times I rubbed my eyes. The compensation document that Diane Holbrook from Human Resources had inadvertently broadcast to the entire finance division, instead of the executive committee, glowed on my monitor, each row more devastating than the last. Nolan Reed, 29 years old, 2 years at the firm, base salary $162,000. Grant Vance, 14 months at the company, base salary $158,000. Spencer Ross, 8 months at the firm, base salary $165,000, all of them trained by me. All of them earning nearly 45% more than my $112,000 compensation package after 11 years of constructing this corporation's entire financial and systems infrastructure from scratch. The bustling sounds of the open office faded into quiet static, the clicking mechanical keyboards, the hushed corridor conversations, the persistent hum of the climate control unit. I scrolled through the document again, my throat tightening when I located my name buried on page 3. Harlan Thorne, Senior Financial Infrastructure Architect, 11 years of service, base salary $112,000. 11 years. Countless 60-hour work weeks. Spent resolving accounting discrepancies, identifying systemic vulnerabilities, and developing compliance frameworks under federal regulations that saved the organization millions in potential fines. Training junior analysts who now earned dramatically more than the man who taught them. I glanced across the floor at Nolan Reed, laughing at something on his phone while leaning back in his chair. Nolan, who still came to my desk twice a week asking how to reconcile complex accounts, payable ledgers, despite 2 years on the payroll. Nolan, who was taking home $50,000 a year more than me. The emergency recall notification from Human Resources arrived 4 minutes later, but I had already downloaded the encrypted file to my secure personal storage. I shut my laptop, stood up, and walked directly to Bryce Henderson's corner office. Bryce had been my division vice president for 6 years. I knocked twice on the glass frame and walked in as he looked up from his tablet. "Harlan, is something urgent occurring?" Bryce asked, looking mildly irritated by the unannounced entry. I set my device down on his mahogany desk, open to the highlighted spreadsheet. "I need to understand this disparity," I said, keeping my tone perfectly controlled. Bryce glanced at the screen, then back to my face. The subtle dilation of his pupil signaled everything I needed to know. He slowly closed the laptop screen. "Harlan, you know company protocol forbids discussing peer compensation." "I am not asking about peer compensation, Bryce. I am asking about my own. 11 years building every ledger system, algorithm, and reporting pipeline this firm operates on. I personally trained every individual listed on this sheet who now earns 45% more than I do. How does the executive team justify this?" He exhaled a long sigh, the exact tone senior managers use when they want you to feel unreasonable. "The labor market has shifted substantially since your initial hire date, Harlan. It is standard corporate policy for fresh market acquisitions. Your base compensation was established in a completely different economic era, then adjust it," I replied calmly. "Bring my compensation to current market parity. It is not that simple, Harlan. We have rigid pay bands, structural caps, and board oversight policies." Bryce actually shrugged his shoulders. "Take it or leave it." My fingers tightened into quiet fists. From a sudden crystalline clarity. "I would like to request a formal compensation review," I stated flatly. "I can submit the paperwork," Bryce said, checking his watch, "but realistically it will be rejected. We finalized annual budget allocations last quarter. You received your standard 3% cost of living adjustment. Is there anything else?" That evening, I sat at my kitchen counter with black coffee and opened my personal workstation. I am Harlan Thorne, 54 years old. The kind of professional who keeps meticulous physical logs and double-checks every entry. The kind of man who has spent a career being praised as reliable and thorough, which is corporate code for someone you can overburden with responsibilities because he takes pride in structural integrity. I began writing the most comprehensive document of my professional life. I outlined a precise timeline of my 11 years at the enterprise. Year 1 created the automated ledger parsing engine that eliminated 30 hours of weekly manual input. Year 3 restructured accounts receivable pipelines, reducing delinquent collections by 42%. Year 6 engineered a tax compliance system that navigated federal audits with zero penalties. I documented every major crisis prevented, every dollar saved, and every core architecture deployed. By 6 in the morning, I compiled a 40-page forensic evaluation titled Institutional Knowledge and System Security Assessment. On the concluding page, I calculated the exact financial value I had generated in the preceding 12 months alone, $345,000 in direct operational savings. Against that, the salary adjustment required for market parity was $43,000. The mathematical logic was indisputable. I printed the dossier on heavy bond paper and had it bound at an early morning print shop. Showered and dressed in my tailored charcoal suit, I drove to headquarters. At 7:15 in the morning, I entered Chief Executive Officer Carlton Vance's empty office. I placed 3 documents on his desk: my formal resignation letter, an active employment offer from Apex Financial Solutions offering $185,000 plus performance equity, and my bound forensic report. Then I walked back to my desk and began my morning routine as if it were any ordinary business day. By 9:30 that morning, my desk phone rang. It was Carlton Vance's direct executive line. "Harlan, please, step into my office immediately," the chief executive officer said, his voice clipped and strained. I took my time gathering my notepad and leather pen holder. I walked deliberately across the central floor, where clusters of employees were whispering near the coffee station. Word of the leaked payroll document had spread across departments like wildfire. I could feel their eyes watching my progress, but I kept my posture erect and my expression impassive. When I entered the CEO's suite, I found Carlton Vance, age 59, sitting behind his glass conference table alongside Bryce Henderson, HR Director Diane Holbrook, and General Counsel Terrence Albright. My bound forensic report lay open in front of Carlton. "Close the door, Harlan," Carlton said, gesturing toward an empty leather armchair. I remained standing. "Good morning, gentlemen," Diane. "We have reviewed the documentation you placed on my desk," Carlton began, tapping the cover of my bound assessment. "I must admit, it is an extraordinarily detailed summary of your tenure." "Thank you," I replied, maintaining a neutral demeanor. "We feel there has been a fundamental misunderstanding regarding market adjustments that we can easily resolve," Diane Holbrook offered, dabbing a tiny bead of perspiration from her forehead. "There is no misunderstanding, Diane," I answered calmly. "I have spent 11 years designing and maintaining the core financial architecture of this enterprise. I have trained 5 junior professionals who currently earn up to 45% more than my compensation package. When I brought this discrepancy to my division manager, I was informed that it was corporate policy and told to take it or leave it. I am simply executing a rational business decision based on the parameters provided to me." Bryce Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact. "Harlan, if you had simply allowed us time to process an internal compensation inquiry through proper channels." "I allowed 11 years for proper channels," I interjected softly. I turned my attention back to Carlton Vance. The concluding appendix of my report includes a preliminary system continuity and knowledge transfer manual. Every proprietary database query, custom server protocol, emergency recovery key, and compliance workaround that resides within my daily operational memory has been categorized by departmental risk. You will find that without proper migration, system maintenance will experience severe friction. General Counsel Terrence Albright, who had been studying me with cold calculation, spoke up. "Harlan, under standard employment frameworks and duty of loyalty principles, employee actions must reflect fiduciary responsibility toward company assets." "My fiduciary responsibility has been impeccable for 11 years, Terrence," I countered. "However, under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act frameworks and federal standards governing wage transparency, employees retain complete liberty to resign and accept market-rate compensation elsewhere. Furthermore, if key infrastructure knowledge is withheld due to constructive dismissal through wage discrimination, the company bears the operational liability." Carlton Vance leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. What would it take for you to withdraw your resignation today, Harlan? I had calculated my position precisely. To consider remaining, I require an immediate base salary adjustment to $195,000, a lump sum retroactive payment of $65,000 to rectify the historical wage disparity over the past year, and a formal written commitment to conduct an independent compensation audit across all operational departments within 30 days. Deanne Holbrook let out an audible breath. Bryce stared down at his desk. Terrence's jaw twitched. Carlton studied me for a long moment, the silence stretching across the executive suite. You realize that what you are demanding bypasses every established executive approval protocol. What is unusual, Carlton, is maintaining the entirety of your financial database infrastructure on the back of a single architect while compensating him at a 45% discount compared to entry-level trainees. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, employees were openly watching the meeting unfold. The power dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Carlton finally spoke. Give the executive committee 24 hours to convene and formulate an official response. My resignation notice specifies a 2-week transition window, I stated firmly. The system migration roadmap outlined in my report requires at least 6 weeks of structured overlap. You have 24 hours to decide whether avoiding an immediate operational outage is worth addressing my terms. As I turned toward the heavy mahogany door, Terrence Albright called out, "Just out of curiosity, Harlan, who extended the competing offer listed in your folder?" I paused with my hand on the brass handle. Rachel Montgomery at Apex Financial Solutions. I let the name echo in the quiet room. Rachel Montgomery had been our senior vice president of operations 5 years ago, until she was pushed out by executive leadership under similar circumstances. She had since established Apex Financial Solutions, a direct market competitor that had systematically captured 3 of our primary institutional accounts over the past 18 months. The visible pale hue that washed over Bryce's face confirmed they understood precisely what was at stake. I walked back to my workstation with steady, measured steps. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. It was a text message from Rachel. "Did you drop the package?" I typed back a concise response. "Delivered. Executive committee meeting underway." Her reply arrived within seconds. "Excellent. Their arrogance will be their undoing. Dinner at 7 to celebrate." I put my phone away and stared at my dual monitors. But what neither Carlton Vance nor Terrence Albright understood was that my salary review report was merely the surface layer of what I had prepared. The true catalyst for what was coming next lay dormant inside a separate, double-encrypted partition on my private drive. A discovery I had quietly documented over 22 long months. Over the past 22 months, while routine ledger maintenance was carried out, I had detected a series of subtle financial anomalies. It began with an obscure vendor disbursement that failed to match any verified purchase order in our database. It was a sum of $14,850 paid to Summit Consulting Services. When I flagged the item to Bryce Henderson, he dismissed it as a pre-approved executive consulting expenditure. However, when identical disbursements began, recurring on the 3rd Tuesday of every month, each increasing by 7 to 12%, I began cross-referencing ledger hashes against federal corporate registration records. Over 22 months, the pattern became undeniable. Someone high within our corporate structure was systematically siphoning funds through fake vendor accounts. The payments were structured precisely beneath internal threshold limits to avoid triggering automated compliance alarms, gradually accumulating to $3,800,000 across 9 distinct shell entities. I had compiled every transaction hash, bank routing identifier, and digital approval stamp into a secure forensic ledger. This was the intelligence that Rachel Montgomery at Apex Financial Solutions knew existed, because she had noticed matching capital distortions before her departure years prior. At 1:15 that afternoon, barely 3 hours into their requested 24-hour review window, my phone rang again. It was Bryce Henderson. "Harlan, please join the executive team in the Pine conference room. We have reached a decision." When I entered the conference room, Carlton Bonds, Vance, Bryce, Diane, and Terrence Albright were waiting around the table. The atmosphere was dense with tension. Carlton gestured to a document sitting before an empty chair. Harlan, after reviewing your contributions and consulting with General Counsel, we are prepared to offer you an upgraded compensation arrangement. I sat down and inspected the document. The terms were explicit: immediate salary adjustment to $195,000 annually, a $65,000 executive retention bonus, paid in full within 7 days, a title promotion to Senior Director of Infrastructure and Systems, and an advisory seat on the Operational Risk Committee. Everything I had requested, wrapped in a polished corporate offer. This compensation package reflects your true value to the firm, Carlton stated, attempting a warm smile. We want to ensure your long-term commitment to our shared vision. I read through the pages carefully until I reached the final attachment, drafted on legal letterhead. It was a broad confidentiality, non-disparagement, and liability release agreement. The language was exceptionally restrictive. It mandated absolute silence regarding all internal financial structures, waived all future legal claims against executive officers, and included a strict non-compete clause that would prevent me from working for any market competitor for 3 years if I ever departed. General Counsel Terrence Albright leaned back, tapping his pen against his pad. Standard executive documentation, Harlan. Once you execute the agreement, the salary adjustment takes effect tomorrow morning. I looked from the legal contract to Terrence's calm eyes. This agreement contains extensive liability release language that goes far beyond standard compensation confidentiality. It is uniform protocol for senior directorship roles, Terrence replied smoothly. It protects institutional integrity. I placed the document back on the polished table. Under federal intellectual property guidelines, under Title 17 of the United States Code Section 106, as well as established corporate governance standards, an employee cannot be compelled to surrender pre-existing intellectual rights or sign broad liability waivers under economic duress created by unrectified wage discrimination. I will require my personal legal counsel to review these specific covenants before I affix my signature. Bryce Henderson frowned. Harlan, we are attempting to resolve this amicably today. Delaying execution of the agreement stalls the bonus payout. I am accepting the compensation adjustment and title change. Effective immediately, I responded evenly. However, the legal release contract requires independent review. I will provide written feedback from my attorney within 5 business days. Carlton Vance looked at Terrence, who gave a subtle nod. Very well, Carlton said. But we expect the signed release by the end of next week. I gathered my copies of the documents and returned to my office. That evening, I met Rachel Montgomery at a restaurant downtown. She reviewed the terms of the counteroffer and laughed quietly over her water. They are terrified, Harlan, she said. They know that if you walk out tomorrow, their infrastructure stability crumbles. But more importantly, Terrence knows that if an independent audit occurs, those fake vendor payments will come to light. He believes that signing that legal release will legally bind me to secrecy regarding those transactions, I observed. Which is why you will continue to delay signing it, Rachel advised. Use technical queries and legal edits to buy time while we finalize our strategic deployment. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed my strategy with methodical precision. I accepted the upgraded title and salary, which immediately elevated my administrative access levels across all corporate servers. I attended executive operations meetings, where managers who had ignored me for a decade now sought my counsel on system security. Meanwhile, every 2 days I sent Terrence Albright's legal team detailed questions regarding specific phrases in the release contract, requesting clarification on non-compete geographic boundaries and indemnification clauses. It was a deliberate stall tactic, designed to keep the document in active negotiation while preventing it from becoming legally binding. My sister Claire visited my apartment that weekend. As we sat on the balcony, she observed me with a mixture of surprise and pride. I have watched you stress over that company for 11 years, Harlan. Now you look like a chess master executing a final sequence, I smiled faintly. Corporate structures rely on the passive compliance of skilled workers, Claire. Once you've realized that your technical competence outweighs their executive authority, the entire dynamic changes. By day 15 of my strategic deployment, one day after my initial 2-week resignation notice would have expired, the decisive moments arrived. I had requested an extraordinary session with the Board of Directors Audit Committee to present a comprehensive system risk evaluation. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the executive boardroom was assembled. Sitting around the mahogany table were Carlton Vance, Bryce Henderson, Terrence Albright, and HR Director Diane Holbrook, joining us via high-definition video link. On the wall display was Amara Jackson, chairwoman of the Board of Directors and head of the Audit Committee. "Harlan," Carlton said, "thank you for organizing this risk assessment session. We are pleased with the seamless transition into your senior directorship role." "Thank you, Carlton," I said, standing at the head of the table with my tablet connected to the central presentation display. "Before we finalize the operational risk protocols for the upcoming fiscal year, there is a critical matter of structural integrity that must be placed before the board." Diane Holbrook smiled warmly, believing I was about to present a routine IT security roadmap. Terrence Albright sat back with his arms crossed, expecting another minor update regarding the pending release contract. I opened a slide deck titled Comprehensive Forensic Audit of Vendor Disbursements, Fiscal Years 22 to 24. I distributed physical copies of a 15-page bound dossier to everyone in the room while transmitting the digital file directly to Chairwoman Amara Jackson's secure tablet. "What is the meaning of this, Harlan?" Bryce Henderson interjected, his tone sharp. "This was supposed to be an infrastructure operational review." "This is an infrastructure operational review, Bryce," I replied with absolute calm. "Specifically, an evaluation of systemic financial leaks occurring through our core payment gateways." On the main display screen, a detailed spreadsheet appeared. It tracked 72 distinct electronic wire transfers executed over the preceding 22 months, totaling exactly $3,800,000. Over the past 22 months, I explained, maintaining a clear, steady voice, I identified a recurring pattern of disbursements issued to 9 separate consulting entities, including Summit Consulting Services, Crestview Analytics, and Vantage Global Advisory. None of these entities possessed active service contracts, verified deliverables, or physical business addresses in corporate registries. On the video monitor, Chairwoman Amara Jackson leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Thorne, are you asserting that $3.8 million in corporate capital has been disbursed without authorization?" "That is correct, Chairwoman Jackson," I stated. "When I initially brought these irregularities to Division VP Bryce Henderson 22 months ago, I was informed that they represented pre-approved executive consulting fees. However, a deeper forensic trace of the banking routing codes reveals that all 9 vendor entities are wholly owned subsidiaries of a single holding company registered in Delaware. Pinewood Ventures LLC." The room descended into total silence. The hum of the air projector seemed abruptly magnified. Bryce Henderson's face went completely pale. I trusted the approval signatures provided by corporate legal," he stammered, his voice trembling slightly. "I assumed the contracts were vetted." "You never verified the documentation, Bryce," I observed quietly. "You signed off on monthly disbursements because they arrived with legal authorization codes." I advanced to page 12 of the dossier on the main screen. According to public corporate filings in Delaware, the sole registered managing agent of Pinewood Ventures LLC is an individual named Julian Peterson. Julian Peterson is the brother-in-law of General Counsel Terrence Albright, married to Claire Peterson, formerly Claire Albright. Terrence Albright stood up so fast, his leather chair crashed against the wood paneling behind him. "This is an outrageous, defamatory attack," he shouted, his voice cracking with uncharacteristic emotion. "This meeting is adjourned immediately. I will not allow an unverified ID employee to make wild accusations in a board session." "Sit down, Terrence." Chairwoman Amara Jackson's voice boomed over the boardroom loudspeakers, sharp and commanding. "Mr. Thorne, continue your presentation." Terrence remained standing, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. I turned to page 14. "Furthermore, Digital forensic analysis of the approval metadata indicates that the electronic signatures authorizing these vendor accounts were generated using forged executive override credentials. Under common law legal doctrines and state penal codes, contracts executed through intentional forgery are void ab initio, meaning void from the very beginning. This constitutes a severe breach of fiduciary duty, active conversion of corporate assets, and systematic dissipation of corporate assets under federal financial regulations. Carlton Vance sat frozen in his chair, staring at the screen in absolute disbelief. "Terrence, is this true?" he whispered. Terrence did not answer. He slowly gathered his leather briefcase, his hands trembling violently. "I am stepping out to consult private counsel," he muttered coldly, turning toward the door. "You will remain in this building until our outside audit team and legal representatives arrive." Chairwoman Jackson declared from the monitor screen. "I am contacting federal authorities and initiating an emergency forensic lockdown of all corporate accounts immediately." Two corporate security officers, summoned by Chairwoman Jackson's administrative assistant, stepped into the hallway outside the boardroom door, blocking the exit. I stood calmly at the head of the table, my tablet in hand. The forensic dossier I had provided contained complete transaction hashes, bank routing records, and IP access logs. An airtight, indisputable chain of evidence that I had spent 22 months meticulously assembling. The trap had sprung, and there was no escape for the men who had spent years underestimating the quiet architect in the corner office. The subsequent 9 hours inside headquarters were a whirlwind of executive crisis management. External forensic accounting teams arrived by mid-afternoon, backed by senior partners from a national legal compliance firm. Federal investigators were briefed via secure conference lines. Terrence Albright was formally interviewed in an executive office before being escorted from the premises under federal oversight. Bryce Henderson was placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave pending an investigation into gross administrative negligence and failure of fiduciary oversight. Throughout the intense proceedings, I remained entirely composed. I sat with the external forensic auditors, guiding them through our database architecture, demonstrating how the fraudulent transactions had been masked, and providing the exact digital keys required to isolate the affected accounts. My documentation was so precise and well organized that the auditing partner remarked he had never seen a more thorough corporate forensic investigation. By 11:17 that evening, the emergency boardroom sessions finally concluded. Carlton Vance walked out into the quiet corridor, looking aged and visibly shaken. The polished CEO swagger that had defined his leadership for a decade was entirely gone. "Harlan," he said, his voice quiet and raspy, "I do not even know how to begin apologizing to you. We took your dedication for granted for 11 years. You tried to warn us about these irregularities, and we ignored you. You did not value institutional memory, Carlton," I replied, packing my tablet and notebooks into my leather briefcase. "You valued short-term cost reduction over structural integrity. When you treat loyal professionals as replaceable line items while rewarding superficial compliance, you create an environment where fraud flourishes." Carlton swallowed hard. "Harlan, the board wants you to take over as Chief Operating Officer. Name your salary. $250,000, equity options, complete executive authority over financial operations. Whatever you require to stay and rebuild this firm." I looked at the CEO, then around the quiet, dimly lit office floor where I had spent 11 years of my life. The smell of stale coffee, the rows of empty cubicles, the glass walls of executive suites that had once seemed imposing. "My price was 11 years of fair compensation, respect, and institutional equity," I said softly. "That window closed 15 days ago." I extended my hand. Carlton hesitated, then shook it with a trembling grip. "Good luck, Carlton." I walked out of the building into the cool midnight air. Across the street, a sleek black sedan was parked near the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Rachel Montgomery. "How did the final act unfold?" she asked as I opened the passenger door and settled into the leather seat. "Terrence is facing federal indictment, Bryce is suspended, and the board is in complete damage control," I reported, setting my briefcase on the floorboard. "And Carlton offered me the Chief Operating Officer position, which you naturally declined." Rachel smiled, handing me a bottle of chilled mineral water. Naturally, I replied. I start as Chief Financial Officer and Infrastructure Director at Apex Financial Solutions on Monday morning. With a signing bonus matching the full value of the funds Terrence attempted to siphon, Rachel added, raising her glass in a quiet toast. To knowing your worth and executing flawless strategy, to structural integrity, I responded, clinking my glass against hers. 2 weeks later, I was relaxing on a quiet beach in South Carolina, taking my first genuine 3-week vacation in over a decade. The ocean breeze was warm, the sound of the waves soothing. My phone, which had previously buzzed endlessly with work emergencies, was silent. When I returned to work at Apex Financial Solutions, the contrast was extraordinary. Together with Rachel, we instituted a company-wide transparent compensation framework. Every position had clearly defined salary bands tied to objective skill metrics and market benchmarks. Every 6 months, an independent audit reviewed employee compensation to ensure that no legacy worker was ever underpaid compared to new acquisitions. Loyalty was rewarded, not penalized. Over the next 2 years, Apex Financial Solutions doubled its market capitalization, capturing several major institutional clients who left my former employer due to concerns over their governance scandals. My former company survived, but it was a shell of its former self. Carlton Vance retired early under board pressure. The firm was restructured, and it was eventually acquired by a regional holding group at a 35% discount on its former valuation. Sometimes colleagues ask me if I regret not exposing the fraud sooner, or if I felt guilty about leaving the organization in turmoil. My answer is always the same. Knowing your true professional worth is not an act of arrogance. It is a fundamental requirement of self-respect. In the corporate world, if you allow yourself to be undervalued, ignored, and undercompensated out of passive habit, the system will exploit your dedication until you have nothing left to give. When you document your value, master your technical craft, and understand the legal frameworks that protect your rights, you transform yourself from an easily replaceable employee into an unassailable strategic force. And when the time comes to take a stand, you do not need to shout or destroy property. You simply present the indisputable facts, execute your strategy with cold precision, and walk away toward the success you have rightfully earned.